How could you tell if he was Italian? Step back now to those thrilling days of yesteryear, the 50s and the 60s, and see if you can answer this question. In high school, how could you distinguish an Italian boy from the rest? Well, you may have said by his swagger, or by his clothes. How about by his DA haircut? Or maybe by the olive skin complexion? Or maybe by the gold chain and crucifix around his neck? Yes, those are all fairly good indicators, but think hard, because there was one surefire sign that told you someone was Italian. You give up? If you haven't got it by now, you never will. Answer: he was the kid that was carrying the brown lunch bag with the olive oil stain in the bottom. I bring you back to 1961, the basement cafeteria of Boston Latin School. At that time, an all-boys school with a strict dress code and discipline. A school that taught you time management by giving you the least possible amount of minutes to get between classes or suffer the pain of a misdemeanor mark. A school where a good percentage of students were of the Jewish persuasion, and Latin was required for all 6 years. That's if you started in the 7th grade. Oh, the abuse those poor sixies, the 7th graders, took from the upperclassmen. Peek into a window of a typical short lunchtime a student had. I think it was about 23 minutes. I would meet a group of kids from Eastie and the North End for lunch, and we'd sit at a fairly long table. Over to our right, the non-Italians. You could tell them by their neatly folded and creased little flimsy brown bags bought specifically for lunches, made to house 2 slices of Wonder Bread with either 1 slice of bologna and cheese or PB&J. That brown bag could be neatly folded and reused for weeks, for the contents did no harm to it. Like many of the other Italian kids, our brown bags were big, thick and sturdy, for in their previous life they probably carried a few loaves of bread or a few pounds of peppers and onions, you know, the number 15 industrial strength bags, and weren't so neat looking. No nice crease folded in it, but a top that was rolled up as best as possible, and oh yes, the olive oil stain that by 11:30 had really permeated the bottom. When an Italian kid was about to open his lunch bag, the whole table to the right would go quiet, a precursor to the E.F. Hutton commercial that we know of a few years ago, as all eyes would turn to see what you had brought for lunch. Well, number 1, you knew you had no Wonder Bread, but a corner of a Bastoni, or slices of scalli, or French, or maybe even a nice Spucky roll. This was wrapped in waxed paper that was very oily by this time, and thankfully your mom had the foreknowledge of what this would look like 5 hours later, and would always include some napkins. Oh, God bless them, for they thought of everything. Inside this delicious bread was for most time the previous night's leftovers. One of my favorites was sausage and broccoli rabe, and eating one of those required using both hands. None of my sandwiches were ever cut diagonally, nor could they be easily handled by two fingers as were those perfect ones that the other kids had. We had eggs and whatever combination, with peppers, or potatoes, or onions, etc. All kinds of omelets, frittatas, between the Italian bread. Veal and eggplant parmesan, meatball subs, and cold cuts, etc. My mom was afraid that the cold cut sandwich would be too dry by itself, so she always put something oily in the middle, such as fried peppers, for fear that I might choke. Friday was the day that you couldn't eat meat, and if I didn't have a frittata, I would have tuna. No, not the one packed in water, but the Italian tuna, Genoa or Pastine brand, which was packed in, you guessed it, olive oil. These were the days before plastic wrap or plastic containers, so the bread became the conduit for carrying part of last night's meal. Sometimes I would feel bad for some of those very pale, white, thin kids and give them a piece of my sandwich. A sandwich made with enough to last you in the event that you had to stay after school or got delayed on the tea. Mom was always thinking ahead. Our bags could not be recycled like the others, and there were a few drawbacks for having such a lunch. One was that the afternoon classes were a killer, because my full stomach would oftentimes cause me to doze off. The other was that you had to be careful carrying your lunch, especially on a packed Green Line train. You didn't want to have that sandwich smashed, for you would cause an oil spill. I carried my brown bag in the same hand that held on to the overhead rail. Hey, 90% of the time we brown bagged it. The only thing I liked in the cafeteria was hot dogs and brownies. But now that I think about it, my mom would also occasionally chop up some hot dogs and make a frittata, eggs and hot dogs. We had very little, but never expected that the school would feed us for nothing. We had loving parents and grandparents who loved us and made sure that we were well fed. You can keep your Betty Crocker. We had our moms, who would send us off with the Italian good seal of approval, that olive oil stain on the bottom of the brown lunch bag. Ciao.